Well, hello again. My name's Adrian Gilbert, and I'm going to continue today with our series on the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse of St. John. We've looked at how that begins with St. John himself having a reverie, a transcendental experience while he's quietly meditating in his hermitage or whatever it is that he lives in. And he sees this cosmic figure appear, the Christ-like figure that calls himself the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. Now, one of the things you have to remember about that, of course, is that John was one of the three disciples with Jesus who actually witnessed the transfiguration that's written of in the Gospels. So he's not someone who's a novice to seeing cosmic beings appearing. And in that vision, he actually saw Moses and Elijah or Elijah with the sort of cosmic Christ figure, and the disciples bowled over by this, the three who were there, and they wanted to make them tabernacles or kind of like altars for each one of them, which they didn't because Jesus didn't want them to. So he has seen these kind of things before, and we can imagine that maybe he's had other images and dreams. He's very much that way inclined. And as I said in the previous lecture, I personally believe that this John the Evangelist, not the Baptist, was the reincarnation of the prophet Daniel. That's a whole other subject, and I'm going to go into the book of Daniel in another series, although it does impinge very much on the book of Revelation. So it was a toss-up which one to do first, but we're going to pursue the book of Revelation here. Now, when we come into chapter 2 and 3, we have the first and the last is cosmic Jesus, who's appeared to him in his room, and we can imagine this sort of glowing figure. He describes him as shining like the sun in its strength, his face glowing and his white hair and his legs burnished like bronze, shining, belt round his breast. And as I've said to you in a previous lecture, this figure also represents or is represented by, I should put it the other way around, the stars of Orion. Now that might seem a very odd sort of thing to say. You might say, well, why do you say that? It doesn't make any sense. There's nothing there about stars and Orion. Well, there's things about stars, but the whole Orion thing will become clearer to you as we progress in this investigation into the book of Revelation, and especially in the next lecture I'm going to give, which concerns the open door of chapter 4. But in this one, we have this figure of this Jesus-like figure, and he gives John messages for 7 churches. Now, earlier in this vision, what John's seen is this Christ figure standing amidst 7 candlesticks with 7 stars in his hand. And this Jesus figure says to him that the 7 stars are 7 angels, and these are the angels of 7 churches, and the lampstands themselves are the 7 churches. Now, one of the things we have to realize about this description and this figuring is that the Jews themselves very much had symbolism to do with candles, and particularly 7 candles. They still do, what they call the menorah, which they light on the Sabbath. And sort of they have a candlestick with 7 candles on it. And there's many different interpretations and investigations that go into what these seven lights mean. They're the seven spirits before God, and we can imagine that that is the real meaning of the word Elohim, which is used right at the beginning of the Bible. The creation in the book of Genesis is done by Elohim, which is a plural word, meaning it's often translated as the seven spirits of God, because they don't like to say seven gods. But we imagine seven aspects, if you like, of God manifesting as these lights, or at a lower level, seven angels. But they also figure as the seven planets of the ancients, as kind of lesser lights in the local solar system in which we live. The ancients didn't know about Uranus and Neptune. They had seven planets that they followed, which were Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, 5 we would call planets. And then they also added on the sun and moon as the kind of moving lights. And the word star, or aster, or astra in Latin, aster in Greek, actually means a light. So we have a different word. We say stars. We understand what stars are as being suns up in the sky. But for them, those were lights in the sky. And there were lesser lights and there were brighter lights. And they understood that some of these move. And they actually did understand and know quite a lot about these planets, more than we think they did, as is given in certain other teachings within the Egyptian and Roman traditions and Platonic. But here we're looking at the messages to the seven churches and to the seven angels of those churches being delivered by Jesus. Now, there's something very special about these churches, and I've got a map here of Western Turkey, which is where they are. I want you to have a look at this. We'll see how the seven churches actually here in the western part. You'll see that they form a kind of circuit. So now, here we can see the seven churches, which are the messages are given to them in chapters 2 and 3 of the Revelation, and they form a kind of itinerary. And we can see here that if we look closely at the map, we can identify the different places that are spoken of. Starting off in Samos, the island here off the coast of what is now Turkey. This is Western Turkey. And St. John is in Samos, that's where he's having his vision. And then he's told to deliver the messages to the seven churches. And I can see this as probably he would have been the bishop of this area, and he probably made regular tours going round these seven churches, visiting his parishioners. When he's not there, obviously they've got priests and elders and whoever who are looking after that particular church. And then as the bishop, he goes there and he would normally deliver a message or a homily or whatever to them. Well, he's doing the same thing here. And we can see this as being like a journey. And it's a journey that has 8 stages to it. He goes first of all to Ephesus, a major city in the area. Then he goes up to Smyrna, and then to Pergamum, and Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea. And then we can imagine coming back, which would be the 8th, coming back to Samos. Now, the number 7 is the number of an octave. So we have 7 days of the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then we're back to Monday again. And so we can see that journey as representing a cycle of 7 days. And if the opening of the revelation, which I believe occurred in June the 22nd of 2000 AD, that's when I think the book is talking about as the beginning, when the appearance of this first and last. Then we've got 7 days that follow that. We've got 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, and 29th. So the opening of the Stargate takes place over this period of time, in between the 22nd actually and the 29th. If we count in the 22nd as being the beginning in Samos, then we've got this cycle which takes up that week to the 29th, which then in the next chapter it goes on about, lo, a gate in heaven is open, and the next lecture is going to be all about what that gate symbolizes. But here we have this description of this journey, so that we're talking about this whole period of this sort of just over a week, 8 days, to take us through from the actual summer solstice through to the 29th. And of course the summer solstice is when the sun is at its strength, which is how the shining figure is described, with his white hair and his face glowing like the sun in its strength. The sun is at its strength at the summer solstice, so that's when that is, in the 21st, 22nd of June 2000. But then it goes on, following on to the 29th, and the 29th, of course, of June is in the Catholic calendar is the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul. And of course, St. Peter is considered to be the gatekeeper. So we have this whole kind of secret doctrine contained here, talking about this process of opening the door. And after the door is opened, of course, is when John starts having his celestial trip and his big visions. Before that, he's just talking to this one figure that appears to him. Now, we also have to realize that the descriptions that we're given are on more than one level. We've got a physical level, and in this case, we've got the 7 churches, but we also have a kind of cosmic physical level, the stars, that each of those churches represents a different, as we would call them, planets. So we got the 7 planets which gather around the constellation of Orion. And the constellation of Orion is the kind of stellar equivalent of this first and last figure. That, take that from me just on trust at the moment. We're going to go into that in much more detail later. But the figure of Orion is very, very important, philosophically speaking, theologically speaking, and prophetically speaking. So we need to understand that this is kind of a puzzle that we're going to be solving, and we're going to have to go into these subjects in much greater detail. Now then, before we leave this subject, I just want to say a couple of words about the sort of greater sense of what this first chapter is all about. And we've got to understand that this book of Revelation, is written, it's actually on 3 levels, as it were. Probably more, actually. But first of all, we've got the level of the sort of physical experience that John's having. And he's telling us how he's in his room in Samos, and suddenly he has this vision, appears to him, of this being, the first and last. Now, as I said before, the description he gives us of this being is almost exactly the same as the description given by Daniel of a similar being that he saw. And he tells us in that chapter in the book that he was with other people who ran away because all they heard was a noise, and they ran away. And only he could see the vision. So we can assume here that only John would be able to see this figure that appears before him. So it's taking place within his chamber or his hermitage, whatever you want to call it, that he's living in, and he sees this being, this cosmic being, that he recognizes and calls the first and the last. And we can understand from what's said that this is actually the spirit form of Jesus Christ coming to him. And then the second level is the prophetic nature of the vision. And it helps us to understand when all the rest of what's going to happen in the book, gives us the timing for it. And it does it in symbolic form. And this is how I interpret it. Maybe other people have a different interpretation, but this is my interpretation, which is that those 7 lights, the 7 candles, which is the 7 churches, the 7 angels of the churches, also have a relationship to the 7 stars of the ancients, the 7 planets, as they would understand it. We would think of 7 planets being with Uranus and Neptune. They didn't know about those, but they did know about the other planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and they added on the sun and moon as the 2 great lights in the sky, and making 7 in all. So it seemed to me, and perhaps I was being guided to this, make up your own mind if you want to believe me on that, but there is only one day within the whole period since the time of Jesus, the time of John, between then and now, where this has actually happened, that we've had the 7 lights or 7 planets gathered around Orion, and as you'll discover in the next chapter, what is called the door in heaven. So the 7 planets seem in some way to correspond with the 7 angels, or the 7 lights, which are illuminating the 7 churches. So if you look at the way the stars were, the sky was, and I've done this with a program called Sky Globe, where you can go back to any time within the last few thousand years, and you can get exactly how the sky looked at that moment in that particular place on Earth. I've set it up for Jerusalem because that's near enough. We can see where the 7 planets were, and we can equate those with the different churches. So I've put number 1, Ephesus, with Mercury. We're moving from the left to the right as you go along the screen. Number 2, Smyrna. Number 3, Pergamum. Smyrna is Venus. 3, Pergamum is Mars. 4, Thyatira, the sun. 5, Sardis, the moon. 6, Philadelphia, Jupiter. And 7, Laodicea, Saturn. So I actually took a party of people, and we actually stood at the foot of the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem on that day at dawn, or just before the dawn, and we actually saw the beginning of the appearance of this cosmic figure with the lights before the dawn, and we saw the moon, Saturn, and Jupiter over the Mount of Olives. After that, the sun rises, and of course it obliterates everything else, so you don't see the other planets. But we saw that for ourselves sitting there, and it's actually in the recording I made, which you can see. I made it for South African television of our whole journey, and you'll find it in I think that's called part 2 in that, where we go to Jerusalem, and towards the end of that you'll see that yourself. So that is the second level. And then there's a third level, which we're going to go into in the rest of the book much more, and that's the mystical level, what all these different things are symbolizing, or what I'm going to interpret what they're symbolizing. It's based mostly on what's gone previously in the Bible, but there are also things that we're told we won't understand until the time of the end. And that's the same thing that's said in Daniel. He says, go away, go on your way, Daniel. The angelic being says to him, go on your way, Daniel. These things are sealed until the time of the end. But you'll be there and you'll see it. So there are things which are in the book of Revelation that only now are we beginning to understand. And the reason we can understand them is because we have things like computers that can backtrack the sky to any time and tell us exactly what the stars are doing in any particular place. And I've actually tracked using the Sky Globe program to how the stars were in 2000. I did this actually before that. So I was prophesying this in my book, Signs in the Sky. And I think I've put up a Kindle version of this on the internet. I do intend to republish it at some stage. But this gives you a lot of detail about these signs in the sky, and particularly the opening of the book of Revelation and chapter 24 of the Matthew Gospel, and Jesus' own prophecies concerning the end of the world, which he gave while sitting on the Mount of Olives. So this is what we're going to be discussing much more in the following lectures, beginning with the next one, which is about the gate in heaven. And you're going to find out what all these dragons and whores of Babylon and horsemen of the apocalypse, what that's all about, because that's all written in symbolic language, and it's not easy for us to understand, but we can if we apply ourselves and we make use of certain modern technology. And we look around us and see what's happening in the world now, which wasn't happening, of course, at the time of John. So thank you very much. I would be very grateful if you would subscribe to this channel and give it a like and press the little bell. I know everyone asks you to do that, and it's very annoying, isn't it, when they won't get into their lecture until they've gone through all that. But if you'll do that, I would be grateful, and please, if you enjoy what I'm saying, please recommend it to your friends and share. Thank you very much.